I stepped off the plane into Reykjavik's biting cold, the kind that cuts straight through your clothes no matter how many layers you wear. Iceland in November wasn't my idea of a vacation, but when Herbert Kettering called, I answered. Always had. The airport buzzed with tourists heading to the hot springs and Northern Lights tours. I wasn't here for any of that. My carry-on contained 3 sweaters, a waterproof jacket, and enough anxiety to fill the North Atlantic. Kettering's voice on the phone had that urgent quality I remembered from our expedition days, the tone that meant he'd found something that couldn't wait. "David, my boy," he'd said, his words rushing together. "I need your expertise, immediately, life and death." Then came coordinates, dates, and cryptic warnings about keeping our communication private. Classic Kettering drama, but I booked the flight anyway. The taxi into Reykjavik crawled through sleety rain, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle. My driver, a stocky man with a magnificent beard, gave up on small talk after my third one-word answer. I watched the volcanic landscape outside blur into gray shapes as we approached the city. 10 years ago, Professor Kettering had been marine biology's rising star, brilliant, methodical, respected. I'd been lucky to study under him. Then came his shift in research priorities, as the university had diplomatically called it. His growing obsession with unexplained maritime phenomena had cost him grants, colleagues, and eventually his department chair. Most of his former students distanced themselves. I hadn't. The hotel saga looked exactly as Kettering had described it. Dated luxury trying hard to maintain its dignity. The lobby featured dark wood paneling and brass fixtures that might have impressed visitors 30 years ago. I checked my watch. Almost 6. Kettering's message said to meet him in the hotel restaurant at 6:30. My room was small but clean, with a view of gray skies and distant mountains. I unpacked quickly, changed into a fresh sweater, and tried to organize my thoughts. Whatever Kettering had found, it was big enough to pull me across the ocean with minimal explanation. Part of me felt the old excitement, the thrill of the unknown that had drawn me to his classes years ago. Another part remembered how his last breakthrough had ended with 3 researchers in the hospital and a university ethics investigation. The hotel restaurant was half empty when I arrived. Kettering stood as soon as I walked in, waving from a corner table. The years hadn't been kind to him. His once robust frame had thinned, making his tweed jacket hang loose at the shoulders. His white hair stood out in wild tufts, and his beard needed trimming. But his eyes, those intense blue eyes, still burned with the same intelligence and focus I remembered. "David, thank God you've come." He grabbed my hand in both of his. His skin felt paper-thin, but his grip remained strong. "Let me introduce Dr. Anya Geller, my research assistant." I hadn't noticed the woman sitting at the table. She rose with fluid grace, extending her hand. "Dr. Cooper, Professor Kettering speaks highly of you." Anya Geller looked to be in her late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and alert green eyes that studied me with open curiosity. Her handshake was firm and brief. "Please sit." Kettering gestured impatiently. "We have much to discuss and little time." I slid into the chair across from them. A half-eaten meal sat in front of Kettering's place, the food pushed around more than consumed. Anya had an untouched cup of coffee. "You look well, David," Kettering said, though his gaze had already drifted to a leather portfolio beside his plate. "Still teaching at Northwestern?" "Boston University now. Took a position in their marine science department 3 years ago." Yes, of course." He wasn't listening. His fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the portfolio. "I should get straight to it. What I'm about to show you must remain between us." He opened the portfolio and pulled out several sheets of paper, yellowed at the edges and covered in cramped handwriting. He spread them across the table, pushing aside bread plates and water glasses. "These arrived over the past 6 months," Kettering said, his voice dropping. "From Dr. Richard Harris." I picked up the nearest letter. The paper felt brittle, the ink slightly faded. "Harris? The name isn't familiar." "He led a 12-person research team investigating magnetic anomalies in the North Atlantic." Kettering leaned forward. Their last official communication was 8 months ago. Everyone assumes they're lost at sea. I skimmed the letter, my eyes catching phrases that made me slow down and read more carefully. The third crew member walked straight into the water last night. No response to our calls. The same vacant expression as Matthews and Donaldson. By morning, no body had washed ashore. I looked up at Kettering. What am I reading here? The truth. He pushed another letter toward me. Harris and his team found something that shouldn't exist. The second letter described equipment failures, unexplained noises, and crew members who stood staring at the island's center for hours, unresponsive to questions or physical contact. The third detailed the discovery of unusual stone formations that seemed to change position when not directly observed. These aren't hoaxes? I asked, though I already knew Kettering would have verified their authenticity. I've known Richard Harris for 20 years, Kettering said. That's his handwriting, his voice, and look at the paper. Analysis shows it's consistent with government-issue scientific field notebooks. The ink contains compounds only manufactured for Arctic expedition use. Anya spoke up, her accent lightly Germanic. I personally verified the handwriting against samples of Dr. Harris's published work. It matches. I read the fourth letter, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with Iceland's weather. Something is wrong with this place. The island appears on no charts, yet the ruins suggest previous habitation. The vegetation grows in patterns that defy natural explanation. And the stone circle. God help me. I've started to hear it at night. A calling. The same call that took the others. I'm fighting it, but my will weakens. If anyone finds these letters, stay away. But if you're reading this, Herbert, and I pray you are, I need help. Whatever ancient thing dwells here is hungry, and we are running out of time. I set the letter down. You believe all this? Kettering's eyes narrowed. You think I don't recognize how it sounds? I've spent 30 years separating scientific fact from maritime superstition, but Harris was a rational man. Something happened to his team. And you want to go there? It wasn't a question. I've chartered a vessel, Kettering confirmed. The Reich here, captained by Eric Hansen. Excellent reputation, knows these waters better than anyone. We leave tomorrow morning. I sat back, running a hand through my hair. This is why you called me? To join a rescue mission to an uncharted island where people apparently walk into the sea? A research expedition, Kettering corrected, to document whatever phenomena affected Harris's team. And yes, to attempt rescue if possible. I looked at Anya. Her face remained professional, but I caught something in her eyes, concern, maybe fear. She'd been working with Kettering long enough to know his obsessions. Professor, I said carefully, your work has taken some unconventional turns in recent years. Kettering laughed, a sharp bark without humor. You mean I've ruined my reputation chasing ghosts and sea monsters? Don't sugarcoat it, David. I know what my colleagues say. He tapped the letters. But this is different. Harris documented everything methodically, and I have other evidence I haven't shown you yet. What evidence? He hesitated, glancing at Anya. We should discuss that on the ship. Too many ears here. Classic Kettering deflection. I'd seen it before when his research hit dead ends or ethical boundaries. He was holding something back, something important enough that even Anya seemed uncomfortable. Why me? I asked. You have Dr. Geller. Why drag me into this? Because you're one of the few who still listens to me, Kettering said bluntly, and because your work on oceanic magnetic field disruptions might help explain what Harris encountered. I wanted to say no. Every rational part of my brain screamed to walk away, book a return flight, and forget Kettering's latest obsession. But I'd spent my career studying unexplained maritime phenomena, the same path that had led Kettering to academic exile. If Harris's letters were genuine. When do we leave? I heard myself ask. Kettering's face brightened. 6 tomorrow morning. The weather looks manageable for the next few days. And how long is this expedition planned for? A week, perhaps 10 days, depending on conditions. Kettering gathered the letters, handling them with reverence. Hansen knows we need to return before the winter storms make passage impossible. We discussed logistics for another hour. Kettering had thought of everything: supplies, equipment, emergency protocols. Whatever his faults, he remained a meticulous planner. By the time we finished, the restaurant had emptied around us. "Get some rest," Kettering said, standing. "Tomorrow we'll come early." Anya walked with me to the elevator while Kettering settled the bill. In the quiet hallway, away from Kettering's intensity, she seemed younger, less certain. "Dr. Cooper," she said softly, "I should mention, the professor hasn't been sleeping well. He's been working on this project day and night for months. You're worried about him." She nodded slightly. "He believes in this mission completely." "And you?" Anja glanced toward the restaurant, making sure Kettering wasn't within earshot. "I believe something happened to Harris's team. The evidence is compelling. But what? I think Professor Kettering knows more than he's telling us." She looked directly at me, her green eyes troubled. "About the island. About what happened there." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Anya stepped back. "We leave at 5:30. The professor wants to be at the dock early." She turned to go, then paused. "I'm glad you're coming with us, Dr. Cooper. The professor needs someone he trusts." I watched her walk back to Kettering, her posture straight but her hands clenched at her sides. Something about our destination made her nervous, more than just concern for an aging professor's obsessions. I returned to my room with Harris's words echoing in my head. Something ancient and hungry. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I woke before my alarm, groggy from fitful sleep filled with dreams of dark water and distant calls. The hotel room's darkness felt oppressive at 5 in the morning, but I forced myself out of bed. My muscles protested as I packed my remaining gear and double-checked my equipment. Outside my window, Reykjavik was still asleep, streetlights casting yellow pools on empty sidewalks. The lobby was deserted except for Anya, who sat with a steaming cup of coffee and a small notebook. She wore practical layers, dark cargo pants, a thick sweater, and a waterproof jacket folded beside her. Her hair was pulled back in the same tight ponytail as yesterday. "Professor Kettering is already at the docks," she said, closing her notebook. "He left an hour ago to check on the supplies." That sounds like him. Never could sleep before an expedition. We shared a taxi to the harbor in near silence. The driver, different from yesterday's chatty one, seemed to sense our mood and kept the radio low. Anya stared out the window, her fingers tracing patterns on her notebook cover. "Have you worked with the professor long?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. 2 years, she answered without looking away from the window. "I was finishing my doctorate in marine acoustics when he guest lectured at my university in Hamburg. He offered me a position the same day." The harbor appeared ahead, a collection of dark shapes against the barely lightening sky. Fishing boats rocked gently at their moorings while larger vessels prepared for early departures. Our driver pulled up at the main dock and pointed toward the north end. "Your boat is that way," he said, accepting my payment. "Weather report says rough seas today." We found the Reykjavik easily enough, a sturdy trawler modified for research expeditions about 60 feet long with a reinforced hull. Its white paint showed patches of rust near the waterline, but the equipment on deck looked well maintained. Kettering paced the dock beside it, checking his watch every few minutes. "Finally," he called when he spotted us. "Hansen wants to catch the morning tide." Captain Eric Hansen stood on deck, watching our approach with an unreadable expression. He was a solid man in his early 50s, with a weather-beaten face and a thick salt and pepper beard. His faded captain's cap sat low over watchful eyes. "Dr. Cooper," he said with a curt nod as I boarded. "Your gear is stowed below. Professor Kettering tells me you're experienced with rough water." "Enough to know when to worry," I replied, matching his businesslike tone. Hansen grunted, which I took as approval. "This is Magnus." He gestured to a stocky younger man checking equipment near the bow. "And Olaf, a tall, thin man at the wheelhouse door. My crew. They don't talk much, but they know these waters." Anya stepped aboard, moving with careful grace as the boat rocked beneath her feet. Hansen gave her a similar introduction, then turned to Kettering, who was still organizing papers even as he boarded. "Professor, we need to leave now if we want to beat the weather coming in from the west." Kettering waved dismissively. Yes, Captain. Proceed." Within 20 minutes, we were pulling away from Reykjavik's harbor. The city's lights receded behind us as we headed northwest into the North Atlantic. The water was choppy, but not dangerous, the boat rising and falling in a steady rhythm that would grow tiresome by day's end. I found space at the stern rail to watch Iceland's coastline slowly disappear. The air tasted of salt and diesel, familiar scents from countless research trips. But something felt different about this expedition, an undercurrent of tension that went beyond Kettering's usual academic enthusiasm. "First time this far north?" Olaf appeared beside me, adjusting a piece of equipment mounted to the rail. "I've done field work near Greenland, but never in these specific waters," I admitted. He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "These waters are strange. Old fishermen say they change their minds sometimes. Current goes one way for 100 years, then wakes up one morning and decides to go another." He tapped the equipment he'd been adjusting. "Depth sounder. You'll want to watch it when we get closer to the coordinates." "Why's that?" Olaf's thin face remained impassive. "Because it will lie to you." He walked away before I could ask what he meant. By mid-morning, we settled into the rhythm of the journey. Hansen and his crew managed the ship with practiced efficiency, rarely speaking more than necessary. Kettering commandeered the small table in the galley, spreading charts across its surface and marking them with incomprehensible notations. He compared compass readings obsessively, muttering about magnetic variances and unrecorded currents. I tried to make myself useful, helping Magnus secure equipment that threatened to shift in the roughening seas. The boat handled well, cutting through waves that grew steadily higher as we moved farther from shore. By noon, the swells reached 8 to 10 feet, making movement around the deck a careful exercise. Anya spent most of the morning assisting Kettering, but after lunch, she found me at the bow where I was testing water samples. "Can we talk?" she asked, bracing herself against the railing as the boat pitched forward. "Somewhere private?" We went to the small lab space below decks that Hansen had cleared for our use. Equipment cases lined the walls, and a narrow workbench provided just enough space for basic analysis. The boat's movement felt more pronounced below, forcing us to steady ourselves against the bulkhead. "The professor isn't telling us everything," Anya said once she confirmed we were alone. "He's been acting strange for months, stranger than usual, I mean." "What kind of strange?" She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Late-night phone calls in languages I don't recognize. Burning research papers when he thinks no one is watching. Locking himself in his office for days, then emerging with pages of calculations he won't explain." "That sounds like Kettering when he's onto something," I said, though I understood her concern. "This is different." She lowered her voice further. 3 months ago, he disappeared for 2 weeks. No warning, no explanation. His assistant, before me, quit when he returned. She wouldn't tell anyone why. I considered this information. The Kettering I knew had always been intense, sometimes secretive about his work until he was ready to publish. But burning papers, unexplained disappearances, that suggested something beyond academic caution. "Do you think it has something to do with Harris and this island?" Anja's green eyes met mine directly. "I think Harris might be a convenient narrative, something to give structure to an obsession that started long before those letters arrived." Her words settled uncomfortably in my mind. If Harris's letters were merely a vehicle for Kettering's existing fixation, what was the real purpose of our journey? The boat lurched suddenly, sending a stack of sample containers sliding across the workbench. I caught them before they fell, "We should get back on deck," I said. "Help me secure these first." We spent the remainder of the day monitoring equipment and taking measurements as the Reykjavik pushed further northwest. The weather held steady, rough but navigable, the sky a uniform gray that matched the churning sea. Kettering barely looked up from his charts, eating the sandwich Anya brought him without seeming to notice what it contained. Night fell early at this latitude, darkness swallowing the horizon by late afternoon. Hansen ordered the running lights on and set a watch schedule with his crew. I volunteered to take a shift, but the captain declined with a gruff, "We know our ship." In the cramped sleeping quarters, I reviewed my notes from the day. Nothing unusual in the water samples, nothing unexpected in the atmospheric readings. Just a normal stretch of North Atlantic, cold and indifferent. If not for Kettering's intensity and Harris's disturbing letters, this would be like any other research expedition I'd joined over the years. Sleep came easier than the night before, the boat's rocking motion familiar and almost comforting after years of fieldwork. I dreamed of deep water and distant lights that moved with purpose beneath the waves. The second day brought heavier seas, but still within the Reykjavik's capabilities. After a quick breakfast of coffee and hardtack, I joined Hansen in the wheelhouse. He acknowledged my presence with a nod, eyes never leaving the instruments before him. "We're making good time," he said after several minutes of silence, weather holding steady. "Kettering says we should reach the coordinates tomorrow, if the charts are right." Something in his tone suggested doubt. These waters aren't always where maps say they should be. Before I could ask what he meant, the radio crackled to life with static and fragmented words. Hansen frowned, adjusting dials with practiced movements. "Coast Guard weather update," he explained. "We get it every 4 hours." But the static continued, occasionally broken by snippets of voices speaking too quickly to understand. Hansen's frown deepened as he tried different frequencies. "Equipment was just serviced last month," he muttered. "Shouldn't be acting up." Throughout the day, the radio problems persisted. Transmissions came through garbled or not at all. Hansen's crew took the malfunctions in stride, relying on their captain's experience and the ship's other instruments. But by late afternoon, those started behaving strangely too. I was on deck with Kettering when Magnus called us to the wheelhouse. Hansen stood before the navigation console, his expression darker than the clouds gathering overhead. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the ship's compass. The needle spun lazily, making a complete rotation every few seconds, despite the ship maintaining a steady course. Hansen tapped the glass, but the erratic movement continued. "Electronic compass is off too," Olaf added. "Says we're heading south." "We're not," Hansen stated flatly. "Sun position confirms we're still northwest." Kettering pushed forward, eyes bright with excitement. "We're approaching the anomaly zone. This is exactly what Harris described in his early letters. Instrumentation failure as they neared the coordinates." "My ship isn't failing," Hansen corrected firmly. "Something is interfering with the instruments." "A distinction without a difference, Captain." Kettering pulled out his own handheld compass, watching with undisguised glee as its needle spun wildly. "Fascinating. The magnetic disturbance is even stronger than I anticipated." Hansen looked to me, clearly hoping for a more rational assessment. I examined the ship's instruments, noting that everything dependent on magnetic orientation was affected while other systems functioned normally. "Could be a strong, localized magnetic anomaly," I suggested. "They're rare but documented in a few deep-sea locations where unusual mineral deposits occur." Hansen seemed partially satisfied with this explanation, but his unease remained visible. "We can navigate by stars tonight if needed, but I don't like when my ship tells me lies." As darkness fell, the situation grew stranger. Olaf reported that water temperature readings fluctuated wildly, showing near freezing 1 minute and 15 degrees warmer the next. Current measurements indicated flows going in contradictory directions simultaneously. The depth sounder, just as Olaf had predicted, began registering impossible readings, showing deep ocean where charts indicated shallow water, then sudden mountains rising from the sea floor only to disappear in the next sweep. "The ocean is wrong here," Magnus said quietly as we checked the equipment for malfunctions and found none. That night, Kettering called us to the galley to review our position and plans. His earlier excitement had settled into focused intensity as he spread his charts on the table. "We're here," he said, pointing to a spot roughly 200 miles northwest of Iceland. Harris's coordinates put the island approximately 40 miles farther. His finger traced our projected route. "We should sight it by mid-morning tomorrow if this weather holds." "If it exists," Hansen added. "No island appears on any of my charts at those coordinates." "That's rather the point of our expedition, isn't it, Captain?" Kettering smiled tightly, to verify what official records have missed or ignored. Hansen didn't return the smile. "These waters have been mapped and traveled for centuries. Islands don't just appear, don't they?" Kettering's eyes gleamed in the galley's harsh light. "History is full of temporary islands, volcanic formations that rise and submerge, sandbars that shift with currents, and then there are places that seem to hide themselves from casual observation." The captain's expression hardened. "I agreed to take you to these coordinates, Professor. I never agreed to entertain ghost stories. Yet you know the local legends, don't you?" Kettering leaned forward. "The missing ships, the fishermen who report land masses where none should be, only to find empty ocean when they return with witnesses." Hansen stood abruptly. "I know my job, Professor. We'll reach your coordinates tomorrow. What we find or don't find there isn't my concern." He left the galley, the door closing firmly behind him. Anya exchanged a look with me across the table. Kettering either didn't notice the tension or chose to ignore it, returning to his charts with renewed focus. "Get some rest," he told us without looking up. "Tomorrow will be a significant day." I slept poorly that night, waking often to the sound of the hull creaking against rough seas. Twice I thought I heard voices above the wind, distant calls that seemed to come from the water itself. Sleep deprivation, I told myself, nothing more. The third morning brought the fog. We spotted it at dawn, a wall of dense gray stretching across the horizon, too uniform and stationary to be natural. Hansen watched it through binoculars, his expression unreadable. "Never seen fog sit like that," he finally said, "not moving with the wind." Kettering could barely contain his excitement. "The thermal boundary Harris described. We're close, very close now. The fog didn't approach us, we approached it. The line between clear air and impenetrable gray remained sharp and defined as we drew nearer." Hansen reduced speed, ordering depth soundings every 2 minutes. All instruments were now behaving erratically, compasses spinning, radar showing phantom objects that disappeared when investigated, radio producing nothing but static or occasional bursts of what sounded like whale song, though no whales were visible. At precisely 9:17 in the morning, we entered the fog bank. The temperature dropped immediately, frost forming on metal surfaces that had been merely wet moments before. Sound behaved strangely in the thick air. Our voices seemed muffled while the slap of waves against the hull amplified. The fog pressed against the windows and crawled across the deck, swallowing visibility beyond a few yards. "Keep her steady," Hansen ordered Olaf at the wheel. "Maintain heading." Magnus rushed to the rail, bent double. When he straightened, his face had a greenish tinge. "Something's wrong," he gasped. "Can't get my balance." I felt it too, a subtle disorientation that went beyond normal seasickness. The inner ear confusion of conflicting signals, as though the boat were simultaneously rising, falling, and remaining level. Anya gripped the door frame, her knuckles white. Even Kettering, usually immune to physical discomfort when pursuing his research, swallowed hard and breathed deliberately through his nose. Only Hansen seemed resistant to the effect, moving around the wheelhouse with grim determination. "It'll pass," he assured his crew. "Eyes on your stations." We crawled through the fog for nearly 3 hours, time stretching like taffy in the disorienting conditions. No one spoke unless necessary. Even Kettering's excitement dimmed in the face of our collective discomfort. The sense of wrongness grew stronger the farther we traveled, a feeling that we had crossed into a place where normal rules were mere suggestions. When the fog finally began to thin around midday, the relief was palpable. Magnus managed a weak smile. Olaf's death grip on the wheel loosened slightly. Anya stepped away from her support and stood straighter. I felt my own nausea recede as visibility slowly improved. Hansen increased our speed cautiously as the last tendrils of fog fell away behind us. Ahead lay open water under a sky so pale it nearly matched the sea. The horizon line blurred in the distance, making it difficult to distinguish where ocean ended and air began. Then I saw it. We all did, though no one spoke immediately. A dark smudge against the colorless background, gradually resolving into a distinct shape as we drew nearer. "Land," Hansen finally said, the word falling heavy in the quiet wheelhouse. It was a small island, perhaps 2 miles across at its widest point. Dark cliffs rose sharply from the water on the near side, jagged and unwelcoming. A gentler slope on the western edge suggested a possible landing area. No vegetation was visible from this distance, just bare rock and what might be ruins of structures near the center. "There it is," Kettering whispered, more to himself than to us. Just as Harris described. Hansen consulted his charts again, running a weathered finger across the area where the island stood. "Nothing," he confirmed. "No record of any land mass at these coordinates." I stared at the approaching island, trying to analyze my reaction with scientific detachment. The formation appeared natural, volcanic in origin based on the rock coloration and structure. Nothing physically impossible about its existence. Yet something about it triggered an instinctive aversion, a sense of wrongness beyond rational explanation. The others felt it too. Anya's breathing quickened slightly. Magnus made a small warding gesture I recognized from my travels among superstitious coastal communities. Even Kettering's expression showed momentary doubt beneath his excitement. Hansen turned to us, his face grave. "We'll approach the western side where the shore allows landing. I'll anchor offshore. The Reikir stays ready to depart at all times." "You won't join us on the island?" Kettering asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "My responsibility is to this ship and my crew." Hansen's voice left no room for argument. "I'll take you where you want to go, Professor, but some places aren't meant for walking on." As we drew closer, the island seemed to grow more substantial, more undeniably real despite its absence from all charts. The cliffs revealed intricate patterns of erosion, and what I had taken for ruins resolved into definite structures, stone buildings clustered near a natural harbor on the western shore. My initial sense of dread didn't diminish with familiarity. If anything, it intensified as details emerged. The water around the island was too still, unaffected by the wind that rippled the sea elsewhere. No birds circled above it despite the nearby nesting sites that would normally attract them. Even the air felt different as we approached. Heavier, older somehow, as though we were breathing the exhalations of something ancient and patient. "We'll prepare the landing boat," Kettering announced. The landing boat scraped against the narrow strip of beach with a sound that made my teeth clench. The shore was littered with decaying seaweed that released a rotten egg stench with each step, forcing me to breathe through my mouth. What caught my eye immediately weren't the expected rocks or driftwood, but scattered bones, bleached white and oddly misshapen, that dotted the shoreline like macabre decorations. I knelt to examine one that resembled a ribcage, but with too many curves and branches. "Fish?" Anya asked, setting down her equipment pack nearby. "No fish I've ever studied," I answered, turning the strange object over. "The structure is all wrong." Kettering barely glanced at the bones, his attention fixed on the interior of the island. "We can catalog biological anomalies later. Let's find the settlement Harris described." I looked back toward the Reikir, anchored safely offshore. Captain Hansen stood at the rail watching us, his posture rigid even at this distance. He had made it abundantly clear he wouldn't be joining us. My father told me stories about islands that weren't meant to be found. He'd told me as we prepared the landing boat. Said they float on the backs of things older than God. This place smells like those stories. At the time, I dismissed it as maritime superstition. Standing on the beach now, surrounded by those strange bones, I wasn't so certain. "David, are you coming?" Anya called. She and Kettering had already started up a narrow path leading away from the shore. I shouldered my pack and followed them, taking one last look at the Rykier. Hansen raised his hand in what might have been a wave or a warning. The path wound through jagged rocks, climbing gradually away from the beach. After about 15 minutes of hiking, we crested a small rise and saw the settlement below us, a cluster of stone buildings with collapsed roofs arranged around what might have once been a central square. A crude wooden dock extended from the western shore, though most of it had been splintered and broken, likely by storms. We approached cautiously. The buildings were older than I'd expected. The stonework suggested construction techniques from at least a century ago, though some structures showed signs of more recent repairs. Vegetation had reclaimed portions of the square, pushing through cracks in the stone paving. "Spread out," Kettering instructed. "Look for any signs of Harris's team or their equipment." I took the northern section of the settlement, methodically checking each building. Most contained nothing but rubble and dirt, occasionally interrupted by rusted metal fragments too degraded to identify. The silence was oppressive. No birdsong, no insects buzzing, not even the expected sounds of wind through abandoned structures. "Over here," Anya's voice cut through the stillness, coming from the largest building at the square's eastern edge. I found her and Kettering inside what appeared to have been the main research station. Unlike the other buildings, this one showed clear signs of recent habitation. A metal table bolted to the floor held the remnants of weather instruments. A barometer with its glass face shattered, an anemometer missing several cups, and a thermometer bent at an unnatural angle. A shortwave radio lay smashed beyond repair in the corner, its components scattered across the stone floor. "Someone deliberately destroyed this equipment," I noted, examining the radio. "These aren't damage patterns from dropping or exposure to elements." Kettering nodded absently, already rummaging through a metal cabinet against the far wall. Anya knelt beside a wooden crate, carefully lifting out a leather-bound book. "I think this is Harris's logbook," she said, opening it carefully. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, dates marked clearly at the top of each entry. "The earliest entry is from February," she continued, flipping through the pages. "Almost exactly 6 months ago." "Read it," Kettering demanded, abandoning his search to join her. Anya cleared her throat. "February 14th. Base camp established on western shore. Initial magnetic readings off the charts, exactly as we hoped. Donaldson thinks the anomaly is deeper than our equipment can measure. Matthews is setting up the long-term monitoring station tomorrow. 12 of us seems excessive for this operation, but McCreary insisted on a full team after what happened to the Peterson expedition." She looked up. "Who was Peterson?" Kettering waved impatiently. "Another researcher. Skip ahead to when things started happening." Anya frowned but flipped forward several pages. "March 23rd. Lost contact with the mainland 3 days ago. Radio working fine, but receiving nothing but static. Matthews spent 6 hours staring at the center of the island today. When approached, he claimed he couldn't remember what he was doing. This is the 3rd such incident this week." A chill ran through me despite the day's warmth. Anya continued reading, her voice growing quieter with each entry. "April 8th. Donaldson is gone. Jenkins saw him walking toward the ocean at midnight. No response to calls or pursuit. By morning, no sign of him on the shoreline. Matthews, exhibiting similar behavior, found him knee-deep in water this morning, unresponsive until physically removed from the surf. April 16th. Matthews gone too. Same pattern as Donaldson. Team morale collapsing. McCreary wants to evacuate, but our launch was damaged in last night's storm. Jenkins discovered unusual stone formation on the island's central hill. Circular arrangement, possibly artificial. Need to investigate tomorrow. April 17th. The stone circle is definitely artificial. 12 standing stones arranged in perfect mathematical precision. The symbols carved into them seem to shift when not viewed directly. Jenkins spent hours sketching them but burned his drawings afterward, claiming they gave him headaches. 3 more team members transfixed by the circle today. Had to drag them away bodily. With each entry, the handwriting became less controlled, the ink blotched in places as though the writer's hand had been shaking. The final entries detailed the gradual disappearance of the entire research team, each following the same pattern, staring toward the island's center, becoming unresponsive, then walking into the ocean during the night. The final entry was dated just 7 weeks ago. May 30th. Only McCreary and I remain. The others are gone. Whatever inhabits this place doesn't just want us to leave, it wants us. The stone circle is the key, but I dare not approach it again after what happened to Jenkins. If anyone finds this record, do not stay on this island after dark. The calling becomes stronger then. I've sealed these warnings in multiple locations. God help us all. Silence fell as Anya finished reading. The logbook confirmed everything in the letters Kettering had shown us in Reykjavik, but something still felt wrong. We need to find this stone circle, Kettering announced, breaking the silence. If it's the source of the anomaly. Professor, I interrupted, shouldn't we be more concerned about what happened to Harris's team? This logbook describes the same phenomenon as the letters, people walking into the ocean, never to return. Exactly why we need to understand the mechanism behind it, Kettering replied, his eyes gleaming with that familiar academic intensity that overlooked human costs in favor of discovery. The stone circle seems to be the focal point. I wanted to argue further, but years of working with Kettering had taught me the futility of challenging him when his mind was set. Instead, I suggested we continue exploring the settlement for more clues before venturing inland. We spent another hour searching the remaining buildings. In what appeared to have been sleeping quarters, we found personal effects hastily abandoned. Books, clothing, a chess set with a game half finished. In another building, supply crates contained enough food and water for several months, barely touched. The whole scene suggested people who hadn't planned to leave, but had disappeared anyway. As we moved inland, I began noticing how wrong the vegetation looked. The island's plant life had seemed unremarkable from a distance, but up close, everything was subtly disturbing. Trees grew with trunks twisted into impossible spirals, their branches uniformly leaning away from the island's center as though trying to escape something. Grass grew in perfect concentric circles rather than natural patches. Even the moss on rocks formed symmetric patterns too precise to be natural. "Look at this," I called to the others, pointing to a patch of wildflowers whose petals were arranged in what appeared to be mathematical sequences. Anya knelt to examine them. The Fibonacci spiral, but too perfect. Nature has variations, imperfections. She reached out to touch one, then pulled back suddenly. The stem is warm. As we pushed deeper into the island's interior, the air itself began to feel different, heavier, somehow resistant to our passage. Each breath required slightly more effort, as though the atmosphere contained something thicker than oxygen. My lungs burned faintly with each inhalation. "Are you experiencing any respiratory difficulty?" I asked the others. Anya nodded. "Like trying to breathe through wet cloth." "Merely the increased humidity of the island's microclimate," Kettering dismissed, though I noticed he was breathing more rapidly than normal. We covered most of the small island over the next few hours, deliberately avoiding the central hill where Harris had described finding the stone circle. Kettering clearly wanted to head there immediately, but Anya had convinced him we needed to document the perimeter first for a complete scientific assessment. By late afternoon, we had found no trace of Harris, McCreary, or any other members of their team. No bodies, no additional records, nothing to indicate what had ultimately happened to them. The island kept its secrets, revealing only enough to unsettle us without providing answers. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, I felt an increasing urgency to return to the Reykjavik. Something about the approaching darkness triggered an almost primal need to be away from this place. We should head back to the landing boat, I suggested, checking my watch. We've got maybe 2 hours of daylight left. Captain Hansen mentioned the difficulty of navigation after dark. Kettering stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression set in familiar, stubborn lines. We've barely scratched the surface of this place, David. The real discovery, the stone circle, awaits investigation, and you want to leave? We can return in the morning, I countered. 1 night on the ship, then a full day of exploration tomorrow. Absolutely not. Kettering's voice hardened. We establish camp here tonight. I won't risk Hansen deciding this investigation is too dangerous and departing without us. He wouldn't do that, I said, though without complete conviction. The captain's unease about the island had been obvious. I'm not willing to take that chance. Kettering gestured to the packs we carried. We have tents, supplies, everything needed for overnight field research. We'll set up near the settlement, not in it, he added, seeing my expression. Close enough to the shore to maintain visual contact with the Reykjavik. Anja looked between us, her face troubled. The logbook specifically warned against staying after dark. Written by a man clearly suffering from paranoia and possibly hallucinations, Kettering countered. We're trained scientists, not superstitious sailors. I wanted to point out that Harris had been a trained scientist too, one whose entire team had vanished under mysterious circumstances, but I knew it would only strengthen Kettering's resolve. Once he interpreted opposition as questioning his judgment, he became immovable. The clearing near the western buildings should work, I conceded reluctantly. It offers some shelter from the wind while maintaining a clear line of sight to the ship. Kettering nodded, satisfied. Excellent. We'll establish base camp there, organize our findings from today, and prepare for a full investigation of the central hill tomorrow. As we headed back toward the settlement, I glanced at the darkening sky. The light was fading faster than it should have, as though the island itself was eager for night to fall. A familiar sense of foreboding settled over me, the same feeling I'd had approaching the island, but stronger now, more immediate. Anja fell into step beside me, her voice low enough that Kettering couldn't hear. I don't like this. Everything about this place feels wrong. I nodded. The logbook entries matched Harris's letters exactly. Too exactly, maybe. She glanced at me sharply. You think they were fabricated? I don't know, but something doesn't add up. I looked toward the central hill, now a dark silhouette against the dimming sky. Whatever Kettering expects to find there tomorrow, I don't think it's going to provide the answers he wants. We reached the clearing as the last direct sunlight faded from the island. As we set up our tents, I kept glancing toward the Reykjavik, its running lights now visible against the gathering darkness. Captain Hansen would be watching, waiting for our signal. 3 quick flashes followed by 1 long, indicating all was well. I took out my flashlight to send the signal, but hesitated, finger on the switch. All was not well. Every instinct told me we should not be here, especially not after dark. But science demanded evidence, not instincts. And so far, all we had were strange bones, disturbing plant life, and the writings of a man who might have been hallucinating. Beside me, Kettering was already organizing his notes, his excitement palpable as he muttered about magnetic anomalies and verification of the Harris phenomenon. Anja methodically unpacked the testing equipment, her movements precise, but her eyes frequently darting toward the island's center. With a sigh, I pointed my flashlight toward the ship and sent the all-clear signal. The Reykjavik's lights blinked once in acknowledgement. We were committed now, a night on this impossible island where people stared at the center before walking into the sea, never to return. I just hoped morning would find us all still here. I woke with a start, my sleeping bag twisted around me like a straitjacket. The air inside the tent felt unusually cold, and a strange silence pressed against my ears. No bird calls, no insects, just the faint sound of waves against the distant shore. Something had jolted me awake, though I couldn't identify what. I checked my watch. 6:27 in the morning. Gray light filtered through the tent fabric. We had agreed to begin our exploration at 7, but my unease pushed me to start moving. I pulled on my clothes and boots, then unzipped the tent flap. Outside, mist clung to the ground in patches, swirling around the tents. Anya's tent stood sealed beside mine, but Kettering's was open, its flap fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. "Professor?" I called, keeping my voice low to avoid waking Anya if she was still asleep. No answer. I approached his tent and peered inside. The sleeping bag lay rumpled and empty. His notebook remained on top of his pack, but his flashlight was missing. My stomach tightened. I moved quickly to Anya's tent and called her name. After a moment, the zipper slid down and she emerged, already dressed, her hair pulled back. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately reading my expression. "Kettering's gone," I said. "His tent's empty." Her eyes widened. "When did he leave?" "No idea. I just woke up." I scanned our surroundings, looking for any sign of him near the camp. He mentioned wanting to check the stone circle first thing today. "You don't think he went during the night?" Alarm sharpened her voice. The possibility had already occurred to me, settling like a stone in my gut. I remembered the logbook entries describing Harris's team members becoming transfixed by the center of the island. We grabbed our packs and flashlights, though the growing daylight made them unnecessary. The Rykir still floated offshore, its silhouette reassuring against the pale morning sky. I considered signaling Captain Hansen but decided against it. No need to alarm him yet. "Look," Anya pointed to the ground just beyond our camp. Footprints marred the dew-covered grass, heading inland toward the center of the island. We followed the tracks without speaking. They led directly away from the settlement, cutting through the bizarrely arranged vegetation I'd noticed yesterday. Kettering had made no attempt to hide his path. The trail was clear, a straight line toward the central hill. The footprints changed as we continued. At first, they showed a normal walking pattern, evenly spaced and firmly planted. But as we approached the hill, they became irregular, sometimes too close together, as if he'd stumbled, other times unnaturally far apart, like he'd suddenly lunged forward. "He was running," Anya said, kneeling to examine a particularly deep imprint. "Or being pulled." The thought sent a chill through me. We quickened our pace, climbing the increasingly steep terrain. The vegetation thinned as we ascended, giving way to bare rock and patches of that mathematically perfect moss. The air grew heavier with each step, making my lungs work harder for less reward. We crested a small ridge, and there it was, the stone circle Harris had described, situated on a flat area near the hill's summit. And standing before it, perfectly still with his back to us, was Herbert Kettering. "Professor," I called, relief washing through me at finding him alive. He didn't respond or give any indication he'd heard me. Anya and I exchanged worried glances before approaching cautiously. The stone circle was more imposing than I had imagined. 12 massive standing stones arranged in perfect geometric precision. Each stone stood about 8 feet tall, dark gray with veins of some shimmering mineral running through them. The spacing between them was identical down to the millimeter, creating a circle approximately 30 feet in diameter. But what made my skin crawl were the symbols carved into each stone, shapes that seemed to shift when I tried to focus on them directly. They weren't static carvings, but appeared to move slightly, like heat distortion above hot pavement. Looking at them directly caused immediate discomfort, a strange pressure behind my eyes that quickly built to pain. I forced my gaze away from the symbols and noticed something equally disturbing. The ground inside the circle was completely barren. Not a blade of grass, not a patch of moss, not even dirt. Just smooth, glass-like stone that reflected the gray morning light. Kettering stood about 10 feet from the nearest stone, his body rigid, arms hanging limply at his sides. As we got closer, I could hear him murmuring something under his breath, too low to make out. "Professor Kettering?" I tried again, moving to his side while being careful to keep my distance from the stones. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the circle with an expression of rapture I'd never seen on his face before. His lips moved continuously, forming words I couldn't understand. "Herbert," Anya said sharply, touching his arm. "We need to go back to camp." No response. She gripped his shoulder and shook him gently. Still nothing. An overwhelming sense of wrongness flooded through me, a visceral need to flee this place immediately. The air around the circle seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. My instincts screamed danger in a way I'd never experienced before. Not the rational assessment of risk, but something deeper, more primal. "We need to get him away from here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Together, Anya and I grasped Kettering's arms. The moment we touched him, his body went rigid, resistance locking his muscles. He tried to pull away from us, his gaze never leaving the circle. "No," he whispered, the first intelligible word he'd spoken. "I need to understand." "Not like this," I insisted, tightening my grip on his arm. "This isn't research, Professor. Something's affecting your mind." "They're calling me," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Can't you hear them? They've been waiting so long." "Who's been waiting?" Anya asked, still holding his other arm firmly. "The ones before." Kettering suddenly lunged forward with surprising strength, nearly breaking free. "They need me to join them." I threw my weight backward, pulling him away from the circle. Anya did the same on her side. For a moment, we were locked in a bizarre tug of war, the professor straining toward the stones while we desperately tried to drag him away. Then, as suddenly as it began, the resistance ceased. Kettering collapsed against us, breathing heavily, confusion replacing the vacant look in his eyes. What happened?" he asked, blinking rapidly. "Why are you restraining me?" "You don't remember coming up there?" I asked, not releasing my grip yet. He frowned, looking around as if seeing the hilltop for the first time. I remember waking early, thinking I should get a head start on our research. Then nothing clear until just now. His gaze drifted back to the stone circle, fascination immediately rekindling. Extraordinary structure. The mathematical precision is... "We need to leave," Anya interrupted, already pulling him toward the path down. "Right now, Professor." He started to protest, but I cut him off. "Something here affected your mind, Kettering. You were in some kind of trance, trying to reach those stones." A flash of clarity crossed his face, followed by what looked like fear. He nodded and allowed us to lead him away from the circle. With each step downhill, his movements became more natural, more his own. We had descended perhaps 50 yards when Anya stopped suddenly, pointing to our right. "What is that?" Half buried in the hillside was what appeared to be the wooden hull of a ship. Not a small boat like our landing craft, but a substantial vessel, its weathered timbers jutting from the earth at an odd angle. It made no sense. We were far from any shoreline, at least 100 feet above sea level. Kettering stared at the partial wreck, momentarily distracted from the pull of the stone circle. "Impossible," he murmured. We approached the wreckage cautiously. The exposed portion revealed the stern of a sailing ship, its wooden planking split and warped, but still recognizable. Above the buried rudder, faded letters spelled out a name: HMS Beagle. "The Beagle?" I said, disbelief coloring my tone. "That's impossible. The HMS Beagle was Darwin's ship. It was broken up in the 1870s. "This is a different vessel," Kettering replied, his academic knowledge momentarily overriding his strange fixation with the stones. The Royal Navy had several ships named Beagle over the years. "Still doesn't explain how it ended up buried in a hillside," Anya pointed out. Part of the ship's cabin remained intact, a dark opening leading into the buried portion. Scientific curiosity momentarily overpowered my fear of the island, and I stepped closer to examine it. "There might be ship's logs or records inside," I suggested. "Something to tell us how it got here." Kettering's eyes lit up. "Yes, excellent thinking, David. Historical context could be crucial to understanding this place. I hesitated, noting how quickly his academic enthusiasm had returned once we'd put some distance between him and the stone circle. It felt manipulative somehow, as if the island had released him just enough to keep us here longer. "I'll check," Anya volunteered, already moving toward the opening. "You keep the professor company." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. Kettering seemed normal now, but I didn't trust him near that opening alone. The way he'd behaved at the stone circle had frightened me more than I wanted to admit. Anya disappeared into the dark cavity of the shipwreck. Minutes passed in tense silence as Kettering and I waited, both stealing glances back up toward the hilltop where the stone circle waited. "I don't remember walking up there," Kettering finally said, his voice subdued. "Last I recall, I was in my tent, thinking about today's research plan. Then I was standing before those stones with you and Anya pulling me away." He looked at me directly, fear evident in his eyes. "What's happening to me, David?" Before I could answer, Anya emerged from the wreck, clutching a leather pouch. "Look at this," she said, breathing quickly. "Letters, more of them, and they're signed by Richard Harris." My heart sank. That's not possible. We're at least 100 feet above sea level. Harris's team had their base camp near the shore. "Yet here they are," she said, opening the pouch to show us several folded papers, yellowed but clearly preserved inside the leather. And these weren't sent. They're dated after the ones Kettering showed us. Kettering reached for them eagerly, but I intercepted, taking the pouch from Anya. "Let's all read them together." We found a relatively flat rock nearby and spread the letters out. There were 5 in total, each dated after the last letter Kettering had presented in Reykjavik. The handwriting matched what we'd seen before, the same cramped style but progressively more erratic with each letter. I read the first one aloud. "June 3rd, McCreary is gone. I am alone now." The night calls grew too strong for him, as they did for all the others. I watched from my hiding place as he approached the stones. I should have tried to stop him, but after what happened to Jenkins when he interfered with Matthews, God forgive me, I was afraid. The stones have a purpose. I understand that now. They are ancient beyond reckoning, placed here by unknown hands for a function I'm only beginning to comprehend. They call to us, draw us in, use us somehow. The pattern of disappearances is not random madness. It's feeding. I paused, looking up at Kettering and Anya. Their faces reflected my own growing horror. I continued to the next letter. June 5th. I've been observing the circle from a distance. What I've seen defies rational explanation. When someone approaches the stones, touches them, the stone moves. Not gradually, not slightly, but suddenly, violently. It falls or pivots or slides, but always with the same result. The person is crushed beneath its impossible weight. Their body changes afterward, absorbed somehow into the stone itself, strengthening it. And afterward, at night, I see them again. Ghostly figures standing around the circle. Not just my team, but others. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of people from different eras, different times. Sailors in old uniforms, natives in traditional dress, even modern clothing on some, all bearing the same expression of horror and entrapment. They are still here, still aware, still suffering. Anja's hand covered her mouth. Kettering had gone pale, his earlier fascination replaced by dawning terror. I forced myself to continue with the third letter. June 7th. I found this ship today, buried in the hillside. The captain's log indicates it ran aground in 1842, though how it came to rest 100 feet above sea level is unexplained. The crew described the same phenomena we experienced: instrument failures, compulsive behavior, eventual disappearance of all hands except the captain who recorded these final entries. More disturbing, they were not the first. The captain wrote of finding evidence of previous shipwrecks, of settlements that suggested this island has been claiming victims for centuries, possibly millennia. Each group finds the remnants of those who came before, just as someone will someday find my records and wonder what happened to us. The fourth letter was shorter. the handwriting now barely legible. June 10th. The calling is getting stronger. I've blocked the doors of my shelter at night, but I keep waking to find myself outside, halfway up the path to the circle. I don't know how much longer I can resist. The stones want me. They're hungry for more. If anyone finds these letters, leave this island immediately. Do not stay after dark. Do not approach the stone circle under any circumstances. It wants us. It calls us. It feeds on us, body and soul, trapping what remains in some half-existence that never ends. The final letter was dated June 12th, just over a month ago. I can't fight it anymore. The pull is constant now, an aching need that allows no rest, no peace. I've lasted longer than the others only through desperate measures, self-inflicted pain to break the trance, restraints that leave my wrists bloody, days without sleep for fear of where I'll wake. But it's winning. Even now, my hand shakes with the effort of not walking toward the hilltop. The stones are patient. They've waited centuries for each victim. They can wait for me. To whoever finds this, I'm sorry I couldn't leave better warnings. The island doesn't just kill, it consumes and preserves some essence of its victims. We become part of it, feeding whatever ancient hunger lives in those stones. I've seen what waits for me in those ghostly figures circling the stones at night. Get off this island. Get off now. It already knows you're here. Silence fell as I finished reading. The morning air seemed colder somehow, the island's strange stillness more threatening. I looked toward the Reykjavik, barely visible from our position on the hillside, and longed for its relative safety. We need to leave, I said, gathering the letters with trembling hands. Right now, signal Hansen and get back to the ship. To my surprise, Kettering nodded immediately. The letters had affected him deeply. The color had drained from his face, and his hands shook slightly as he helped collect the papers. Yes, he agreed. This is beyond academic interest now. We've verified Harris's account and found substantial evidence of the phenomenon he described. That constitutes a complete research objective. His sudden rationality after his trance-like state at the stone circle made me suspicious, but I wasn't going to argue against leaving. We started down the hill, moving as quickly as the rough terrain allowed. No one spoke, each lost in private thoughts about what we'd discovered. The letters weighed heavily in my pack, their warnings echoing in my mind. About halfway down, Kettering stopped abruptly. Wait, we can't just leave. My heart sank. Why not? Harris's research materials, his complete records, they're still out there somewhere on this island. He gestured vaguely around us. Think of the scientific value. We have fragmentary accounts, but his full documentation would be invaluable. Professor, Anya said carefully. Harris's final warning was explicit. We need to leave now, while we still can. Just a few more hours, Kettering pleaded. We can search the main research station more thoroughly, perhaps find his complete logs or recordings. Once we have those, we'll depart immediately. I studied his face, trying to determine if this was his own scientific interest speaking or some influence from the island. His eyes seemed clear, his manner rational, but after what we'd seen at the stone circle, I trusted nothing about this place. No, I said firmly. We have enough evidence to justify a larger, better-equipped expedition if necessary, but we're leaving now. Something flashed across Kettering's face. Anger, perhaps, or something darker. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then he nodded reluctantly. You're right, of course. Safety must come first. We'll return to camp, collect our essential equipment, and signal Hansen immediately. The relief I felt was overwhelming. We continued down the hill toward our camp, moving faster now with the promise of departure. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following us, though the hillside remained empty. As we approached the camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched by unseen eyes. The island's unnatural silence seemed heavier now, more deliberate, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. We reached our tents and began packing quickly, taking only what was necessary and leaving the rest. I pulled out my signal mirror to contact Hansen, stepping away from camp to get a clear line of sight to the Reykjavik. The morning sun provided perfect conditions for signaling. I angled the mirror, sending the emergency retrieval pattern we had arranged, 5 quick flashes in rapid succession. I waited for acknowledgement, heart pounding. After several long seconds, a single light flashed from the ship's deck. Hansen had seen our signal and understood. Relief flooded through me as I watched small figures on the Reykjavik begin preparing the landing boat. I returned to camp where Anya was helping Kettering secure his research materials. The professor seemed subdued, moving mechanically as he packed his notes. His earlier enthusiasm had vanished, replaced by a quiet resignation that troubled me more than his arguments had. Hansen is preparing the landing boat, I told them. We should be ready to depart as soon as it reaches shore. Anya nodded, relief clear on her face. Thank God. My eyes kept scanning the water as we approached our camp, watching for Hansen's landing boat. He'd acknowledged our signal, and relief washed through me at the thought of leaving this place. Our backpacks contained the essential research materials, including Harris's letters from the shipwreck, while we'd decided to abandon the tents and remaining supplies in our haste to depart. Something's wrong, Anya said as we neared the clearing. I followed her gaze and immediately saw what she meant. Kettering's tent, which had been partially packed when we left to signal Hansen, now stood completely empty. His backpack was gone. Professor? I called, looking around the clearing. No answer came back. Just the unnatural silence of the island, swallowing my voice. We dropped our packs and searched the immediate area, calling Kettering's name. The campsite showed signs of hurried activity. Equipment moved, papers shuffled. Most concerning was what we didn't find. Harris's letters were missing from my pack where I'd carefully stored them. Over here, Anya said, holding up a folded paper she'd found beneath a rock near Kettering's tent. My stomach twisted as I recognized Kettering's handwriting. Unlike the careful penmanship of his academic papers, these words were scrawled hastily across the page. David and Anja, by the time you read this, I will be at the Stone Circle. I know you intended us to leave today, but I cannot. The work here is too important, too vital to abandon. I must confess the truth. There was no Dr. Richard Harris. There was no research expedition before ours. I wrote all the letters myself over the past year. The logbook too. All of it. Fabricated to ensure your participation, knowing you would never join me otherwise. I looked up at Anya, shock freezing my breath in my lungs. She gestured for me to continue reading. I discovered references to this island in obscure maritime records 3 years ago. Old sailors' tales of a place that appears and disappears, taking ships and crews with it. Most dismissed as superstition, but the geographical consistency was striking. I've been visiting secretly for months, first briefly, then for longer periods. Each time, I felt the pull of the Stone Circle grow stronger. The island is real. The phenomenon is real. But I needed fresh minds here. Minds that could help me understand what happens when someone approaches the stones. I couldn't risk the university learning of my unauthorized expeditions, so I created Harris and his team as justification for an official research trip. Tonight, I will approach the circle and discover its true nature. My years of research have prepared me to resist its influence in ways Harris's fictional team could not. If I'm right, the stones represent a doorway to something beyond our current understanding of physics and reality itself. Forgive me for the deception. Science demands sacrifice, and this discovery will justify everything. Herbert. The paper trembled in my hands. I looked at Anya, whose face had gone pale. He made it all up, she whispered. Everything we read, everything we came here for. It was all a lie. The realization struck me like a physical blow. The entire expedition had been built on an elaborate fiction created by a man whose obsession had clearly driven him past the boundaries of ethical research into something far darker. But the island is real, I said. looking around at the unnatural stillness surrounding us. The stone circle is real, and what it does to people. "We need to find him," Anya said, already reaching for her flashlight. The sun had nearly set, painting the western sky in deep oranges and reds. "If he approaches those stones..." I nodded, remembering the warnings in the fabricated letters. Kettering had written those warnings himself, which meant he understood the danger. Yet he was still going to the circle, believing he could somehow resist what others could not. "What about Hansen?" I asked, gesturing toward the shore where the landing boat would soon arrive. "We'll miss him if we wait," Anya said. "But if we don't go after Kettering now..." The choice was clear. We couldn't leave a man behind, even one who had lied to us so completely. I grabbed my flashlight and secured a water bottle to my belt. "Let's go." We set off toward the central hill at a jog, flashlight beams bouncing ahead of us in the gathering darkness. The island felt different at night, more alive somehow, more hostile. Shadows seemed to shift and move independently of our lights, creating the constant impression of movement just beyond our vision. The vegetation we passed seemed to withdraw from our presence, leaves curling inward as our lights swept over them. Most disturbing was the sound, a low, almost subsonic humming that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. It wasn't loud enough to interfere with conversation, but it was impossible to ignore, vibrating through the soles of my boots and making my teeth ache slightly. "Do you hear that?" I asked Anya as we began climbing the steeper terrain toward the hilltop. She nodded, her face tight with concentration. "It's coming from up there." The humming grew more pronounced as we ascended, accompanied by a subtle pressure against my eardrums. The darkness was nearly complete now, our flashlights cutting narrow paths through the blackness. Moonlight filtered through scattered clouds, casting just enough illumination to reveal the strange silhouettes of twisted trees and rock formations. "There!" Anya pointed ahead. A beam of light danced among the trees near the summit, bobbing and weaving in a pattern that suggested someone running or moving erratically. Kettering's flashlight. "Professor!" I shouted. "Stop! Don't go near the stones." If he heard us, he gave no indication. His light continued moving upward, approaching the area where we knew the stone circle waited. We pushed harder, scrambling up the rocky slope. My lungs burned with the effort, each breath seeming to draw in less oxygen than normal. The air itself felt resistant, as if the island was actively trying to slow our progress. As we neared the summit, the humming transformed into a more complex sound, rhythmic pulses that made me think of massive machinery operating far below the surface. The pressure in my ears increased, and I noticed a metallic taste in my mouth. We broke through the tree line onto the open area surrounding the stone circle. In the moonlight, the 12 standing stones looked even more imposing than they had during the day, dark silhouettes against the night sky, their surfaces catching and reflecting moonlight in ways that seemed impossible given their rough texture. Kettering's flashlight beam played across the nearest stone. He stood at the edge of the circle, one hand extended toward the carved symbols. "Herbert!" I shouted, my voice sounding flat and muffled in the strange acoustics of the hilltop. "Don't touch the stones." He turned slightly, his face catching the moonlight. Even from a distance, I could see the expression of rapture on his features, the same look he'd worn when we found him here this morning. But now, there was something more, a certainty that hadn't been there before. "David," he called back, his voice strangely clear despite the distance. "It's magnificent. They're ready to show me everything." "The letters," Anya yelled, moving forward cautiously. "Your own warnings. You wrote that the stones crush anyone who touches them." "A necessary fiction," Kettering replied, "to ensure you would follow the right path if I failed." He turned back to the stone, his hand still outstretched. "But I won't fail. I've prepared for this moment for years." We were still 20 yards away when Kettering stepped forward and placed his palm flat against the nearest stone. For one brief moment, nothing happened. Kettering stood frozen, his body silhouetted against the stone's massive bulk, his flashlight beam pointed skyward from his other hand. Then came a sound I will never forget, a deep, grinding noise like massive gears engaging after centuries of disuse. The stone beneath Kettering's hand shifted slightly. His flashlight dropped to the ground, its beam going wild for an instant before stabilizing, pointing across the empty circle. The grinding sound intensified, drowning out whatever Kettering might have said next. Then, with terrible suddenness, silence fell. The flashlight lay on the ground, still illuminated but motionless. Of Kettering himself, we could see nothing. "Herbert," Anya called, her voice small in the renewed silence. No answer came. The stone circle stood as before, impassive and ancient in the moonlight. But something had changed. I could feel it in the air, a shift in whatever strange energy permeated this place. "We need to get closer," I said, though every instinct screamed against approaching the stones. We moved forward slowly, our flashlight beams playing across the ground. The humming had stopped completely, leaving an absence that felt more threatening than the sound had been. As we drew nearer to where Kettering had stood, I became aware of a presence behind us, a prickling sensation between my shoulder blades that made me want to turn around. But I kept my focus forward, toward the fallen flashlight and the stone that had moved. We were 10 yards away when Anya grabbed my arm, stopping me. "Look," she whispered, pointing not at the stones, but at the ground between them. At first I saw nothing unusual, just the same glass-like surface I'd noticed this morning. Then I realized what had changed. The surface was no longer reflecting moonlight as it should have been. Instead, it seemed to absorb the light, creating a perfect circle of darkness at the center. And within that darkness, something moved. Shapes without form, suggestions of figures that appeared and disappeared too quickly to identify. The prickling sensation intensified. I knew without turning that if I looked behind us now, I would see something I couldn't unsee, something that would change me forever. "We need to go," I said, backing away slowly. "Right now." Anya nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We began retreating, still facing the stone circle, unwilling to turn our backs on it. The fallen flashlight remained where it had dropped, its beam now seeming dimmer than before, as if whatever darkness filled the circle was gradually consuming its light. We backed away until we reached the tree line, then finally turned and began descending the hill. Neither of us spoke as we made our way down in the darkness, our flashlights barely penetrating the unnatural shadows that seemed to thicken around us. The island felt actively hostile now, as if our presence was an affront to whatever ancient purpose it served. Branches caught at our clothing, roots seemed to rise up to trip us, and the ground itself felt unstable beneath our feet. When we finally reached the base of the hill, I stopped and looked back. The stone circle was no longer visible from this vantage point, but a faint glow emanated from the summit. Not the bright beam of Kettering's fallen flashlight, but something colder and older, pulsing with a rhythm that made my heart stutter in my chest. "What do we do now?" Anya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned toward the shore where Hansen's landing boat might still be waiting. "We get off this island, tonight, and we take every scrap of Kettering's research with us." "And Kettering?" I couldn't answer. We both knew what we'd witnessed, even if we couldn't fully comprehend it. The grinding stone, the sudden silence, the professor's disappearance, all matched the fate he had described in his fictional Harris letters. Except they hadn't been entirely fictional, had they? He'd known something about this place, something true and terrible that he'd hidden within his fabrications. As we made our way back toward the camp, I struggled to process Kettering's betrayal. The man I had respected for years had manipulated us, lied to us, placed us in mortal danger, all in service of an obsession he couldn't control. Yet even knowing this, I felt a profound sadness for what had just happened to him. The night pressed around us, full of whispers and movements just beyond the reach of our lights, and behind us, on the hilltop, ancient stones continued their patient, eternal work, waiting for the next victim to approach, to touch, to join whatever collected consciousness dwelled within them. "We can't just leave," Anya said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "We don't know what happened to Kettering." I wanted to argue, to insist we get off this cursed island immediately, but she was right. Whatever Kettering had done, whatever lies he'd told us, we couldn't abandon him without knowing his fate. "We go back," I agreed reluctantly. "But we stay at the edge of the clearing. We don't approach the stones." We turned and began the climb back up the hill, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air grew thicker as we ascended, making breathing difficult. That strange metallic taste returned to my mouth, and the pressure against my eardrums intensified. When we reached the edge of the clearing again, we paused, shining our lights toward the stone circle. The fallen flashlight still lay where Kettering had dropped it, its beam pointing across the empty circle. Of Kettering himself, there was no sign. "We need to get closer," Anya whispered, though her voice held no enthusiasm for the idea. We moved forward cautiously, sweeping our lights across the ground. As we approached, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a dark shape on the far side of the circle, partially hidden behind one of the massive standing stones. "There," I said, pointing. "Behind that stone." We circled wide, keeping our distance from the standing stones themselves. As we came around, our lights revealed what the darkness had hidden. Kettering's body, or what remained of it, crushed beneath the fallen stone. The massive monolith had somehow toppled forward, pinning him beneath its impossible weight. Only his upper body remained visible, one arm outstretched as if still reaching for something. His face was frozen in an expression of rapture and horror combined, a man who had glimpsed something beyond human comprehension in his final moments. Anya turned away, a choked sound escaping her. I forced myself to look, to bear witness to what had happened. The stone that had fallen was the same one Kettering had touched. Somehow, it had pivoted from its base, crushing him beneath it. "We need to," I started to say, when Anya grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "David," she whispered, "look." I turned to follow her gaze and felt the world shift beneath my feet. Around the perimeter of the stone circle, translucent figures had materialized in the moonlight. Dozens of people from different time periods, all bearing the same expression of horror and desperation. I recognized sailors in 19th century naval uniforms, figures in clothing from earlier centuries, and modern attire on others. They stood perfectly still, their forms shimmering slightly, as if they existed somewhere between our reality and another. Most disturbing were the figures I recognized from Kettering's descriptions, men in expedition gear matching what Harris's fictional research team would have worn. They stood among the others, somehow made real by Kettering's obsessive belief or by whatever power dwelled in this place. "They're not real," I whispered, though I didn't believe my own words. "They can't be." As if in response, the stones began to emit a low resonance that made my teeth ache. The sound built slowly, layering into a complex pattern that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I watched in disbelief as the entire circle began to rotate, not the stones themselves moving, but the very ground they stood upon, turning slowly counterclockwise. The ghostly figures remained motionless as the circle rotated, their eyes fixed on the center where the darkness seemed to deepen with each passing second. I felt an almost irresistible compulsion to step forward, to cross the boundary into the circle. My feet began moving of their own accord, drawn by a force I couldn't explain or resist. Beside me, Anya was experiencing the same pull. Her body leaned forward, her eyes taking on the same vacant expression I'd seen on Kettering's face earlier that day. "No," I managed to say, the word taking enormous effort to form. I reached out and grabbed her arm, the physical contact breaking whatever hold the circle had on me. "We need to run. Now." The moment of clarity was fleeting. I tightened my grip on Anya's arm and pulled her backward, away from the circle. She resisted briefly, then seemed to snap out of the trance, her eyes clearing. "Run," she gasped. We turned and fled down the hillside, no longer concerned with caution. Behind us, the humming sound intensified, filling the night air with a resonance that seemed to shake the very earth. As we ran, I heard stone grinding against stone, the ancient mechanism continuing its deadly work. The descent was chaotic. We stumbled, fell, and picked ourselves up again, driven by pure survival instinct. The island itself seemed alive around us, vegetation writhing in patterns that had nothing to do with wind. Strange lights flickered among the trees, and whispers that weren't quite voices followed us down the slope. We reached the base of the hill and continued running toward the shore, where we hoped Hansen's landing boat would still be waiting. The beach came into view, and with it, a sight that flooded me with relief. Hansen standing in the shallows, frantically gesturing for us to hurry. "Come on!" he shouted. "We need to leave now!" We sprinted across the sand, gasping for breath. Hansen didn't wait for explanations, immediately helping us into the landing boat and pushing off from shore with powerful strokes. Only when we were 20 yards out did he speak again. "Where's Kettering?" he demanded, his eyes scanning the shoreline behind us. "Dead," I said, still fighting to catch my breath. "Crushed by one of the stones." Hansen crossed himself, a gesture that seemed out of character for the gruff captain. "I was about to leave without you," he admitted. "Something's happening, something in the water." I followed his gaze back toward the Raikir, which waited 100 yards offshore. The sea around the vessel was strange, unnaturally calm in some areas, while other sections showed circular patterns of movement, as if something large was moving just beneath the surface. "I saw lights," Hansen continued, rowing with powerful, urgent strokes, "moving under the water around my ship, circling it. Never seen anything like it." As we approached the Raikir, I glanced back at the island. From this distance, I could see the glow at the summit where the stone circle stood. It pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, sending beams of cold light into the night sky. The island's silhouette seemed to waver slightly, as if it wasn't quite solid. Hansen's crew helped us aboard, their faces tight with fear. No one asked questions as the captain immediately ordered preparations for departure. The anchor came up, engines rumbled to life, and the Raikir began moving away from the cursed island. I stood at the rail, watching as the stone circle's glow faded into the distance. The island itself seemed to grow less distinct the farther we traveled, its edges blurring against the night sky until I could no longer be certain it was still there at all. Neither Anya nor I spoke much during the journey back to Iceland. We remained on deck until exhaustion forced us below, where nightmares waited in what little sleep we managed to find. The crew maintained a respectful distance, asking no questions about what had happened or why we had returned one person short. The Raikir made good time, with instruments functioning normally once we were beyond the island's influence. Captain Hansen pushed the engines hard, as if eager to put as much distance as possible between his ship and that place. We reached Reykjavik 2 days later, docking in the early morning under gray skies. Before disembarking, Hansen approached us at the rail. "What will you tell people?" he asked quietly. "About Kettering?" Anya and I exchanged glances. We had discussed this during the journey back. "A climbing accident," I replied. "He was exploring the terrain, fell, and was killed instantly. A tragedy, but not uncommon in remote locations." Hansen nodded slowly. "And the island?" "What island?" I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Our expedition found nothing at those coordinates, just empty ocean." Something like relief crossed the captain's weathered face. "Wise," he murmured. "Very wise." We parted with handshakes and no promises to stay in touch. Some experiences create bonds that need no maintenance, and others are best forgotten entirely. Our time with Hansen fell somewhere between these extremes. Anya and I checked into separate rooms at a small hotel far from the Hotel Saga, where our journey had begun. That afternoon, we met in my room with all of Kettering's research materials spread across the bed. His notebooks, the fabricated Harris letters, photographs, and the additional letters we'd found in the shipwreck. All of it needs to go, Anya said, her voice flat with exhaustion. Every last page. I nodded, already feeding papers into the small trash can I'd emptied for this purpose. We worked methodically, burning small batches of papers and crushing the ashes afterward. The hotel room filled with the acrid smell of burning paper, but I didn't care. Some things needed to be destroyed completely. He knew, Anya said as she handed me another stack of notes. Kettering knew what would happen. That's why he created Harris and the fictional research team, to give himself cover for his own obsession. And to draw us in, I added. He needed witnesses, people who would see what happened to him. Why? What could that possibly accomplish? I had no answer. Perhaps Kettering's obsession had driven him beyond rational thought, or perhaps he truly believed he could succeed where his fictional Harris had failed. Either way, his deception had led to his death and nearly to ours as well. We continued burning papers until nothing remained but ashes. The physical evidence was gone, but the memories remained. The stone circle, the ghostly figures, the grinding sound of stone against stone. Those would stay with us, unwelcome companions for the rest of our lives. The next morning, we filed our official report with the university that had funded the expedition. We described a failed search for magnetic anomalies, equipment malfunctions, and Kettering's tragic accident on unnamed rocky outcroppings. No mention of an island that appeared where none should exist, no reference to stone circles or vanished crews made real by obsessive belief. Our report was accepted without question. Kettering's body, we explained, could not be recovered due to dangerous conditions and the remote location. A memorial service would be held at the university upon our return. That evening, Anya and I shared a quiet dinner at a small restaurant near the harbor. We spoke little, both lost in our own thoughts. The events of the past week seemed simultaneously immediate and distant, as if they had happened both yesterday and in another lifetime entirely. "What do you think it was?" Anya finally asked, breaking the silence. "The island, the stones, all of it." I considered the question carefully. "I don't know. Something ancient. Something that doesn't belong in our understanding of the world." I paused, remembering the rotating circle, the ghostly figures, the pull I had felt toward the center. Whatever it is, it's patient. It waits for people to find it, draws them in, and consumes them somehow. "And makes them real," Anya added quietly. "Harris and his team never existed except in Kettering's imagination, but we saw them there, among the others." I nodded, uncomfortable with the implications. If belief could manifest reality in that place, what else might be possible? What other horrors might wait to be called into existence by the right combination of obsession and proximity? "The island will appear again," I said, certain of this if nothing else. "Somewhere, sometime, and someone will find it. But not us," Anya said firmly. "We're done with this, all of it." I agreed, though part of me wondered if it was truly possible to walk away from what we had experienced. The island had marked us in ways I was only beginning to understand. I had dreams about it every night, the stone circle rotating slowly, the darkness at its center deepening, calling me forward. We parted the next morning at the airport. Anya was returning to Hamburg, while I had a flight back to London later that day. We embraced briefly, our shared experience creating a bond that needed no words. "Take care of yourself," she said, studying my face as if memorizing it. "You too," I replied. "And Anya, if you start having dreams about it, I'll call you immediately," she promised. "But I won't. It's over." I watched her walk through the security checkpoint, then turned and headed back to my hotel. I had a few hours before my own flight, time to sit with my thoughts and try to make peace with what had happened. But I knew the truth. The island would continue calling to others, and Kettering's obsession had only fed its hunger for new victims. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the North Atlantic, ancient stones waited in perfect geometric precision, patient beyond human reckoning, hungry for more.